static, we're going to end up with the same shapes on all our particles. So if I scrub the timeline, you can probably see that these particles are slightly different shapes. You can see this one here, pyramid's flexing over to one side, and you can see the same here, it's flexing over to one side. So each one of these is a snapshot of this hierarchy of objects in time. So that's pretty cool. If we wanted to, we could use animated shape also, but I'll actually show you that later. So that's it for now. You can see what you can do with a hierarchy. You can bring in the first hierarchy, you can break it up into its objects and children, and you can snapshot the actual shapes in time. So let's have a look at the next set, which is a group. I've selected the group there. I'll scrub the timeline, and you can see we've got the group copied in its entirety all over the mesh. Now the group can actually work in the same way as a hierarchy. You can actually break up the group into its constituent members and then have those used on each particle, pretty much the same way as the hierarchy. So we'll scrub the timeline, turn on group members, and you can see it's done what I've just said. You can see it's used the tube, the teapot, and the torus. Let's have a look if this is a random function. No, doesn't seem to be. So again, it's assigning some kind of order to those objects within the group, and it's using that order to assign it to the particle IDs of the particles. So there we go. Now each one of these meshes could be animated, and if we wanted to, we could pick up that animation as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility there as well. If we go along to our last option, which is the ogre, I'll just turn off this. You can see that now we have the ogre mesh copied all over, and you can see it's quite large, which is pretty good. It's pretty much the way we want to see it. Now to get a little bit of extra speed out of this, I'm just going to hide this mesh, because in this particular scene, when you select the ogre as an instance object, probably what you'd want to do in a real flow is you wouldn't want to show the meshes. You'd only want to show the meshes when you're setting up your particles, and you probably only want to show a very small percentage, because the ogre mesh is quite heavy. And once you've got 9 of them, it's a pretty heavy animation to play back. And if we play back the sequence, you can see we've got no animation at the moment, and that's quite simply because we haven't got either of the animated options turned on, either animated shape or acquire current shape. To show you that acquire current shape works the way I just described it, this is actually probably a better example, because the ogre goes through a more extreme set of actions during its animation. I'll turn on acquire current shape. There we go, and you can see that each one of the ogres is now in a different pose based on the frame on which the particle was created, and it's just using that creation frame as an offset of the animation. So if a particle is created on frame 25, it looks at the animation and it uses the shape of the ogre on frame 25. It's as simple as that. So you can see if I scrub along, each one pops into existence in its different pose. So that's actually quite a cool option. It may seem a bit frivolous, but you could use that if you wanted to, on a tree. If you wanted to have particles as using a tree mesh on particles to make a small forest, you could actually animate the trees bending and flexing, and then use a random offset, and then you'd actually have different shaped trees depending on whether they're bending one way or bending another way, and you can actually randomize and create a lot of variation in your tree models in that way. You could also morph the skin of the tree. You can actually go in and use a morph modifier, paint different morphs all over the tree, animate that, so basically the tree warps and pulses around, and do what I've just described. Actually have these variations in the tree shape assigned to your particles as they're created in your scene. So we've got our ogre, and now I'm going to turn on animated shape. This will actually turn off acquire current shape because the two are mutually exclusive. I'll turn on animated shape there, and if I go back to the first frame, I'm actually going to let this play through, and I'm using a cache on this particular particle flow, and that's simply to speed up the calculation and the display of what we've actually got going on in the simulation. So now if I press play, you can see that each one of the ogres